this is the simplest if statement that you can write, right? We have if, and here you'll write your code. And here you write some kind of condition. So this condition can be any, my pen, can be any condition as long as it's a Boolean. Or as we say, it evaluates to Boolean. It's a fancy word of just saying, okay, it has to be a Boolean. For example, what can it be? It can be comparison. It can be comparisons, right? It can be straight up Booleans themselves. It can be comparisons. In most cases, in 90% of the cases, I would say 90% of the cases, it's going to be a comparison. In most cases, you will compare something, two different things, and you'll say, okay, this one is bigger or greater than or smaller than or equal, or you will say not equal, right? I'll show you all these comparisons. But the main thing is that this condition has to be a Boolean. So it has to be either true or false. There's nothing else that can be inside of this condition. So let me show you what I mean, right? I can literally write here a keyword true, which is the value of a Boolean, right? So I write here true. And let's write here system.debug hi from if. And I'm going to write outside hi from outside of if. Now, my question to you, your guess, when I run this code, what you're gonna see in the debug logs, right? Let me execute this. Debug only, hi from if, hi from outside of if. Makes sense, right? Now what happens here is that this condition, it evaluates to true because it is true. There's no other option how it can run out, right? So Apex runs this line number 1 and it checks this inside of this if statement. It checks if this condition here is true, which obviously it is because it is true. Then Apex gonna run everything that is inside, okay? Everything that is inside of those curly brackets. And then Apex, once it runs everything that is inside of those brackets, it's gonna run all the other code that you have. So it's important. I know it's very simple, but just really think about this, okay? So I'm gonna put here. I'm gonna speak about the other part. Okay, I have here another screenshot prepared. This one goes away. We don't need it right now. We only need this one, right? So really think about this, that everything that is inside of those curly brackets, so it's basically starting from here, if you had some code there, then all this, and up to this, it will only run if this thing is going to be true, right? So the evaluation, the decision making of Apex is like condition. We check the condition. Wait, let me write it properly. We take the condition, and if the condition is true, then run everything that is inside of the brackets. If the condition is false, then run next line. Next line, okay? So then we run everything that is outside. So if here we had something like false, then we would run the next line that we have, actually line number 4, right? So let me show you. Let's go back. If here we have false, then question to you. Write in the comments, right? Write your guess. Whenever I ask you the question, write your guess in the comments, and then we'll check, okay? So, question to you. How many system debugs, how many debug statements we gonna see? Execute. Debug only. Hi from outside of if. Right? It makes sense. Apex did not run anything that is inside because the condition here is false. So it's very simple how this if statement works, right? Now, of course, you will not have true or false immediately written as a value there, right? It would be kind of stupid because just by looking at this, we can just immediately know if it's going to run or not. Usually you'll have some kind of comparison. Like, for example, 5 is greater than 10, right? Let's execute this. We execute and we see that it doesn't run anything that is inside of the if statement. Why? Again, because this condition here, the result of this comparison is false. So the way it works, let me make a screenshot again, show you. Screenshot. Here we go, right? The way it works is that Apex executes line number 1, and it takes this whole thing, and it actually executes the comparison. Is 5 greater than 10? No, it's false, right? It's not. And remember, we have greater than, we have less than, we have greater than equal, less than equal, we have equal comparison, and we have not equal comparison, right? Those are all comparisons you can have. And all of them, all those comparisons, they either gonna give you true or gonna give you false, right? Only those possibilities. Because it's either the number is either greater than another number or it's not. There's no other third option. Okay? So here, instead of this, Apex is gonna evaluate this whole thing and it's gonna write, okay, I know what's written here. It's written if false. So I'm not gonna execute anything that is inside. I'm not even gonna have a look at this. I'm just gonna skip and run the next line and the next line. Okay? Now, usually, of course, it's also not that simple because usually you will have some kind of variable inside of the condition. So, for example, here we're gonna have integer age equal to, let's say, let's say 27, right? Which is my age at this moment at least. If age is greater than 18, then let's do like this. Hey, please have a beer, right? Please have a beer. If you're above 18, at least here in Germany, I don't know, US, I think it's a bit different. And here is welcome to our bar. I think this, right? You can see that if age is going to be above 18, then we will execute please have a beer. I'm going to click on execute. Please have a beer. Welcome to our bar. Obviously, if I were 15 and I execute the same code, you're only welcome to the bar, but you're not offered a beer, which is very sad, actually. I think in Germany, actually, you would be still offered a beer. But it's another topic. So let's switch back to 27, right? So again, the same thing happens. I think I already made a screenshot out of it. So the same thing happens, right? It's important to keep in mind that Apex does evaluate those conditions, right? So step number 1, Apex looks at this and says, hey, okay, age, what is the value of age? The value of age is actually 27. Is 27 greater than 18? 18. It is greater, so it is true. Okay, so this whole thing becomes true. So we do execute everything that is inside. And obviously, if it's false, then we don't execute. It's very simple. Okay, just important that you always need to have a boolean in there. All right, so what's the next thing? The next thing you can see here else if in the structure, but I'm gonna skip this else if for a second, and I'm just gonna explain you else, right? So else is the next topic, and here you can see that sometimes basically you say if the condition is true, then do something. Otherwise, do something else, right? So for example, if you're above 18, I'm gonna offer you a beer, and else system.debug, please have a cola, right? Please have a cola. Or here in Germany, we have a really cool drink, which is called Spezi, but I'm gonna stick with cola, okay? So we have cola. Now, if we are less than 15, less than 18, right? So let's execute this thing. Execute, debug only, please have a cola and welcome to our bar. So you can see that you still welcome people to the bar, but you offer them cola. And you can see how in real life that usually will be the case, right? So this is something that I had on this picture here that I prepared in advance. only, this else statement is only executed if this condition here is false. If it's false, then remember, nothing here will be executed, okay? And then you will be jumped straight into the else statement, and else statement will be executed. Now, you see there's no condition on the else. Because what kind of condition will there be? The condition is that this thing is false. This thing, if it's false, then it causes immediately the else to fire. You can have 0 or 1 else statements. Else statement. 0 or 1. So you don't need to have an else statement. You can delete this else statement as we had before, and your if statement is still gonna work. Or you can have 1 else statement, but not 2 else statements. How would it even work with 2 else statements, right? Because, hey, this condition is wrong, so which else do we execute then, right? That wouldn't work. We don't know which one would we execute. So we only can have maximum 1 else statement, and it is not required. In fact, I see a lot of junior and beginner people, they kind of overshoot a lot with the else statements. I'll show you later a little bit when we go into the actual practice and when we go into a bit more realistic scenarios. I'll show you the else statements, how you can basically avoid them by using default values, okay? And for now, it's not very important. So for now, you need to know that else statement this can only be 1 or 0. All right, so that was easy enough, right? I told you, it's an easy topic. But now we need to go into the else if. And else if is pretty interesting. So you see, I put it here in the beginning, in the middle between them, right? In order to have an else if, you need to have at least one if. Not at least one. You need to have an if statement. If you have 2, that's not related. Okay. You need to have 1 if statement. And the amount of else if you can have is 0 and infinity. As many as you want, right? Not like else, it's either 0 or 1, but with the else if, you can have as many as you want. Right? So let's give here a good example. So if age is, let's do it like this. Age greater than equal to 0. 1 second. Okay, so let's do it here. I have an example for you. This one. I don't want to just write it down because it's gonna be a very long way of writing it down. All right, so age, we have age equal to 21. And age is less than 18, then we say someone very young. Then else if we have age between 18 and 65, then we say adult, and then we say old, right? If it's above 18, okay? So this is just an example of a very simple else if, right? So here you can see that with the if statement, we're still gonna have a condition. And again, the same applies to the condition as we had before. So I'm gonna put it here. Here we go. Exactly the same applies, right? So you still need to have, let's go here. So we're gonna evaluate first this condition, and it's gonna be false. So we know, okay, so this one is false. So we know that we're not going to execute anything that is inside of this if statement, okay? We disregard everything that is written here. And then we go and we evaluate the next if condition. We evaluate this condition here. And this condition is true, right? Because remember, this is AND. I hope you watched my other videos. Yeah? If you didn't, then this is where I discussed it. Right, this is ampersand, this is an AND operator. It combines 2 different booleans. One boolean, and it's an awful one to, I don't know how to draw it, to be honest. But it's a typical AND statement that you know from, oh my god, what's my writing here? AND that you know from formulas and admin stuff, right? So it's an AND in Apex. And here we know that age is between 18 and 21. So we know that this one is going to be true. So this one is going to be executed. Yeah. And since this if statement was executed, else statement is not going to be executed. So we're going to jump into this one. Let me execute this one. Come on, Salesforce. Don't be so buggy. Adult, and welcome to our bar, right? Like this. Now, the beautiful thing about else if is that we can have as many else if as we want. So for example, here, I can say else if, right? Else if, here we go, like this. Else if, and age is greater than 18, and age is less than 30, then we can say system.debug young adult, something like this. Why do I have that many brackets? Too many brackets. Young adult, like this, right? And we're gonna execute this one, and it's gonna be still adult. I'll show you why in a second. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, okay. So this was not the best example. This was not the best example. But essentially here you can see that between 30 and yeah, let's do it like this. 30 till 65 is going to be an adult, and like this is going to be young adult. Let's see. I just want to get this young adult there. And this is good that we actually had this problem, because I'll show you what was the problem. Okay, so let's go back now here. 18, right? 18, 65, and 30. Now let's have a look how Apex actually executes this, because it's incredibly important for us to understand. So I'm gonna do like this, and I'm gonna click on execute, and you can see that we are getting adult. Okay, let's have a look. Why do we get adult in there? Here, like this. Okay, so now this is very important. This is probably one of the most important topics here about the else if, because it's easy topic on its own, but this is the one the tricky part. But I'm sure you will understand very easily. Okay, so this one, let's immediately make it. We know that this is false, so it's, I'm gonna do like this, false, so it's not executing, right? So we don't care about this. Now the next condition that is getting checked is this condition, right? Between 18 and 65. Now this condition, we already found out that it's gonna deliver true. And that means that we're gonna execute this part. Why don't we go then and re-evaluate this condition? The reason for that is because in this whole thing, between all the else ifs and else that you have, only one thing will be executed. Only one condition will be executed. So not only it's going to be one, it's also going to be the first one that matches the full, that gives true in the condition, right? So if you have, even if you had like 50 different else if, and all of them would be true, you still would execute only the first one that matches. If you want to really understand this, it's similar to the decision element in the flow, right? So if you're familiar with the flows. So in flows, we have decision element, right? We have decision element. And this decision element, you can have different path, right? You can have different paths. And one of them is going to be default path, right? So default path is equal to else, and all the other paths, this is the conditions that this is else if, right? The first one is going to be if, and all the others is going to be else if. Now, when you run your flow, can you at the same time take this path and this path? Can you do that? No, you can't. How can you have like on the same time, two different outcomes in one decision element? You cannot, right? So the same here in Apex. You can only have one of them being executed, okay? And this is the first one that's gonna evaluate to true. So that's an important thing about else if. Now okay, so first now the question to you. Now this is my quiz to you. We have here this task. Okay? So we have number 35. Let me close all that. Number 35. And we have a bunch of else if statements. No else statement. Okay? I don't know if it's important. Maybe it's important, maybe it's not. Who knows? But we don't have any else statement. Now, this is quiz to you. Write in the chat the answer that you think that the line is going to be there. I'm not going to execute it. I'm not going to show you. But I want to check if you have the right answer, okay? So write it in the chat and then I'll check how good you actually followed this thing. Okay? Oh, why do I say chat? It's not chat. Comments. Write in the freaking comments. All right. So the next thing what we need to discuss is actually nested if statements and a lot of different typical mistakes that I see people do. Let's do it like this. Integer age is equal to 25 and string name is equal to Alex, like this, right? And now we want to say, so our task is following. This is going to be our task. If it's Alex and he is older than 24, then greet him. Then say hi to him. Right? So that's our task. It is a little bit strange, but essentially we want to say if it's Alex and he is older than 24, then we want to say hi to him. But if it's not Alex, and if it's Alex, but he's not older than 24, then we don't want to say to him nothing interesting, okay? And I see that a lot of beginners, they have an idea to do an if statement inside of the if statement, right? So, for example, if age is greater than 24, and then here inside you say, okay, if name is equal to Alex, right? Then I'll say system.debug welcome old Alex, like this, right? And then else for the first one, they're gonna say system debug sorry, nothing for you. Sorry, nothing for you, right? So this is just an example what I see a lot of beginners do, and this is incorrect. Whenever you have the situation where you have one if statement and below that if statement you have another if statement again, which means you have nested if statements, you can always take this condition here, delete it, and add here as a second condition, like this. You can always do that. Of course, you can have also if inside of if, but it is not the best practice. It is not good. What you're trying to achieve with your code in most cases is that you want your code to be as less branched out as possible. The more code you're shifting on the right side, the more you have if inside of for loop and all of this type of things, the worse it is, the less readable your code is. So you really want your code to be as left-centered as possible. You want to basically have your code very readable on the left side, right? So this condition is way more easier to read than to have if inside of if. So if you can avoid nested ifs, you should, right? Doesn't mean you can avoid it all the time, but if you can, you should, okay? Now here you can also see the comparison with a name and Alex, so it's comparison a string and a string. So it's also a good one, right? Now, sometimes you'll see that conditions that you'll have, they will kind of get a little bit out of hand. So they're gonna be like really huge. In this case, what you can do is that you can create another boolean. You can say Alex and older than 24. And you can take this whole thing here. You can put it into this if statement, and then you can use this boolean here inside of the if statement. And you can see what it does is that it makes this if statement here way easier to read, because you don't need to read this part here anymore, especially if you name your boolean very well. You don't need to read this part anymore. You only need to read the variable name, and it should read like a plain English. And then when you read it as a plain English, Alex and older than 24, and then you understand what it does, this if statement. So this is the best practice, okay? But this is only for very long if statements, right? I would say you can consider it up starting from 3 different conditions when you combine them like this here, right? If you only have 1 or 2, it's fine to just put it here in the if statement. Nothing bad is gonna happen with this. Okay, so this is pretty much everything you need to know about else if statement, like from the theory perspective, right? It looks like some crazy man drawings, but so in terms of theory, that's pretty much it. Like as a concept itself, an if statement is a really easy one. There are a couple of things though that I think important when applied in real life, and I want to show you how they work, right? Because remember that theory is not equal real life, right? Or as people say, IRL, in real life. Okay. So I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna open any kind of class that I have here. I'm gonna open anything that is related to account service. Let's do account service, right? I'm gonna just delete everything. I don't really care. This is my test work anyway. So our task here is pretty simple. We get an account, and if the annual revenue is 0, then we need to return a string that says, hey, there's no tier. And then we have those conditions here, right? For different tiers of an account. Here, I think you cannot see it. Yeah, golden tier for this one. So essentially, we get an account, and we need to evaluate based on the annual revenue of this account. What is the tier of this account? And if you have no idea about methods, I have a video about that, so you should be watching that, okay? Anyway, public string, let's say, evaluate account tier, right? And we're gonna get here as a parameter account, like this, right? Again, if you don't know this, like this is so important, I just 1 second, don't get your attention span. Don't click on another video. So basically, a lot of beginners, they try to jump through those concepts as fast as possible. Well, if you don't understand what I'm writing here very well, if you don't know what are the methods, you'll have hard times now to understand if statements. Not because if statements are hard, but because you did not understand the previous concepts. So you need to watch the previous concepts. God damn it. Anyway. Okay, so let's do it like this. Basically, we need to have a bunch of if statements, right? And I'm gonna just walk you through multiple different solutions, and some of them are gonna be better, some of them are gonna be worse. And at the end, I'm gonna show you how I would solve it in real life, okay? So here, very easy, what do we do, right? The most naive way of doing that would be something like this. If account annual revenue is equal to 0, then return no tier, like this. And then we're gonna have else if, and then we're gonna have an else statement like this, right? So else if account revenue, annual revenue is greater than, I'm gonna make it again smaller so we can fit everything. So annual revenue is great, is what, less than 50K, right? That's 50K. I see a lot of people doing this, by the way, especially like in US, people from US or something around this. Like, this is wrong, don't do that. Like, numbers, the way you write numbers is just like properly, like the whole number. That's the way you write in Apex. Okay, then we return silver tier. Then the next condition, if it's greater than 50K, and on top of that, it's less than 300K. And again, you cannot see it here. Whenever, if you have this like big if statement, you can always do it like this, right? And then you can see it's easy to read. Okay, it goes back again to this best practice that you're trying to have your code more on the left side towards these lines here that you have, and less on the right side. Especially don't want you have your code to be like one big line, because no one can actually read this big line. You would need to kind of scroll on the right, which is kind of awful, right? You can see here it's easy to read what's going on there. Okay, so we have annual revenue less than 300,000, of course. This one 300,000, and then we're gonna return golden tier. Nice, this is a golden tier, whatever that means. And then another one is gonna be VIP tier. Return VIP tier. Okay, so this is the most naive way of doing that, and that's gonna work. Okay, so let me show you how to actually test if it works or not. So to call an Apex method, what do we need? You always need first to instantiate a class where this method is. Now we need to get the, I usually call it result, doesn't really matter what you call the variable, but we need to get actually the result. We need to actually call this one. And the way we call it is like service, evaluate tier, and now we need to pass an account there, and then we're gonna system.debug result, right? But we need to pass an account inside, so we need to create an account equal to the new account and account. I don't really need to insert this account, right? So this account, because we're not really working with database, we're not inserting it in any way, it can just be here in any way we want. And we're gonna have, let's say 30K annual revenue, right? 30K annual revenue, and we're gonna pass inside here an account like this, right? Pretty simple. And let's execute this. And debug only, and it's silver tier, right? So that's what we expected here, less than 50K, but not equal to 0. So 30K works, silver tier, right? Okay. Now, there are a bunch of things that you can improve here. Now, first thing that you see is that we have 4 return statements. In real life, I would try to minimize the amount of return statements you have, because if you have this method and you try to debug it, right? You have some kind of bug and you're searching for a bug and you cannot find this bug, and you're looking at this method and you're like, maybe the bug is there. There are 4 points that you need to check. There are 4 points of return that you need to check and that you need to debug. And this is a little bit annoying. Not saying also leaving out completely that it's harder to read these return statements. I prefer having one return statement at the end of the whole thing, at the end of the whole method. So here, instead of having this, I would say string tier and then return tier. Yeah. And now here I'll just say, okay, tier is equal to this one, tier is equal to this one, tier equal to this one, tier equal to this one, right? So in terms of the functionality, we didn't really change anything. It's still the same functionality, right, as it used to be. Just we are using a variable, and now we know that we are only returning tier, okay? Which is pretty cool. But another thing that I don't like in this code is that you really don't want to have your variables declared like this, just hanging out there with no value assigned to them. So at least I would usually just try to assign here a single quote, at least something. But in this case, we can assign something very interesting. We can assign this else statement value. So I'm gonna take this thing here and I'm gonna move it here and I'm gonna delete this else statement completely. Because the else statement, it's only executed when none of those here were true. And if none of those were true, then we can just write it as a default value here. Then none of them are gonna be true. And then we're gonna return tier, and it's gonna be VIP tier. Only if we hit one of those if or else if conditions, our tier variable will be overwritten, the value inside, right? Only if one of them is true. Which means we can leave out the else statement and we can just have a default value. And this is what I see a lot of beginners don't do, right? I would say in real life, you will very rarely have an else statement. Like it's not like it's super rare, but you really don't have it that much. So if you have an if statement and you have an else statement, sometimes it's better to leave out else statement completely and just keep doing the code and move the whatever you have in the beginning as a default value for something. Or maybe sometimes you just want to keep doing whatever you wanted to do after the else statement. Okay. So we fixed this one. But there's another thing that we can fix. Now let's have a look at our conditions here. First of all, annual revenue is equal to 0. This is good. Now we have the annual revenue is equal to 50K. And let's give an example here that we're gonna have a 100K. 100K, 100,000 annual revenue, right? Let's have this example. If we have 100,000 as a revenue, then this thing here will evaluate to false. We know it, right? Because 100,000 is not less than 50K, right? So this thing is false. Now, it means that by the time we are checking this condition, we know that this part is always true. It's important. It's very important to understand this. If we ever have to check this condition, it means that the previous two conditions, they were false, right? If they were not false, if they were true, we would execute one of them and we would not evaluate this third condition. So we can only evaluate this third condition only if the previous two were false. And one of them is this condition. So we definitely know by the time we are evaluating this whole thing, we know for sure with 100% that this condition here is false. It's guaranteed. We know that. So there is no point for us to introducing this whole thing here. We can remove this part because we know that it's always going to be true. So there's no point for us to adding this because we can just replace it with like true and it will be exactly the same because we know that it's going to be true all the time. I know this is a little bit mind-blowing, okay? So really think about this, really go through this, really try to focus on this concept. And it comes down from that previous concept where we discussed that you only evaluate and run one of those ifs, never all of them. So if you have here true, then it means you can simplify it in this way. Like this. Okay? That's how you simplify it. And you can see how much easier it is to read this code. We have tier, we have a clear default value, VIP tier, this is default. And then if it's 0, then it's going to be no tier. If it's less than 50K, then it's going to be no tier. And if it's less than 30K, it will be a golden tier. And then we return this variable. If it's 100K, then this condition is going to be false, and this one is going to be true. If it's 40k, then this one is going to be true, and this one will not even be evaluated, right? So if we have 40k, right? Those technically, if you look at them, right, technically this condition is true, and also this condition is technically true. But the second one, the 300k, will never be evaluated because the first one is going to be true. Let's click on execute to kind of verify what I'm saying to you about this crazy if statements. Okay, so it's silver tier, right? You can see that it worked. It's silver tier. It's not golden tier. And it's important that you can only have basically one condition at a time. Only one of them can be executed. Now let's speak about another typical mistake that I see beginners do with the if statements. And you can see that kind of the theory behind if statements is super easy, but the real life application of them is a bit more nuanced, right? So let's do it like this. If annual revenue, we need to have a method that if annual revenue is greater than 100k, then it's VIP, let's say rich client, and else then it's poor client. Then it's poor client. Let's do it like this, right? So we have public boolean. Yeah, boolean. So let's do it like this. So public boolean is this client rich. Okay, it's rich if the annual revenue is over 100k, right? And we're getting an account as an argument here. And what a lot of people do is that they say, okay, if account annual revenue is greater than 100k, right? Return true, else return false. This is a very typical way of writing it, right? Now, first thing, there are a few improvements, but first thing, the most important what you can do here is you can just take this else statement and you can remove again the whole else statement, right? Now, let's try to do it in this way. I'm gonna try to do it this, okay? And you can see that it's gonna say missing return statement, line 29. Hey, but how is it missing return statement if we clearly do have a return statement here? What's going on there? Okay, let me explain. Good questions, if that was your question. I hope it was your question. You looked at this and you're like, hey, what's going on there? Okay. So, is someone rich? Now, from the perspective of Apex as a programming language or Apex compiler, when they look at this, they don't know the essence. They don't understand the logic inside of your method. They only look at the tree and basically they look at your compiler, they look at your code, and they look at possible path. And they look at if statement, and no matter what's written in the if statement, even if you know that it's always going to be true, compiler and Apex language doesn't. How would they know? They would need to somehow read and understand that it's going to be true or false, right? So they see that your method have a return statement for one of the possible outcomes, right? So the possible outcome is that you go inside of the if statement and you hit a return statement. But what happens after? What happens if this whole thing is false? False, right? Then Apex knows that they're not going to execute this line of code. They know that they're not going to execute it. So what are they going to execute after? Apex doesn't know, right? Apex is not very smart. Apex needs instruction for every single thing it's going to be freaking doing, right? So in this case, it doesn't know what to do. So it says to you, hey, I have no idea what's going on here. You're missing a return statement. So you need to add the return statement, even though we have a return statement inside of the method, but we still need to have a return statement, okay? So let's add it here. return false. Now, see what's gonna happen when we add return false. First of all, this whole method is gonna work, right? Now we can save it and it works. But the most important is that if here is gonna be true, then you will return true and you will never run into these lines. Because remember, return is always the last line you hit in the method. As soon as you hit the return statement, you will immediately return and you will never hit any other lines. So in this case, return true, and you will just return and go and execute whatever called this method. But if this if statement is going to be false, we don't even need to look what's going to be inside. We're going to have, okay, this is false. Let's execute the next line after this if statement, which is return false. So we'll return false. Yeah. So this is pretty straightforward. But now, let's have a look how we can improve this. Because this is, if I see this, if you're taking part of one of my cohorts, I don't know, or if we are doing mentoring or whatever, if you show me your code, maybe you write your code in the comments. Maybe if you do that, I'll say, hey, this is pretty bad. This is definitely screams for me beginner code. The reason for that, hey, I did not, okay, wait 1 second. I did not include here the important bracket because I don't want to show you bad code. This one, that's more correct. Yeah, that's correct. We were missing the last bracket here. Okay, so this is beginner code. Now let's have a look how I would implement it in real life. Something that you really need to understand in this case. And it's going to apply to every situation like this that you see in the code. To every situation, you will be able to do that with the if statement. So let's have a look at 2 situations. You have here basically like a decision, right? So this is a decision if annual revenue is greater than 100K, right? So this is the condition that you have, this whole condition. It is this condition. Now, what are possible outcomes that you have? Obviously, it's only 2 outcomes. It's either true, this condition is either true, or this condition is false. Because it's a Boolean, it's a comparison. It's either greater than 100K or it's not greater than 100K. We covered this already, right? Then, if it's true, you say return true. True. If it's false, you say return false. Now, here's the thing. You can see how the value of the condition itself matches the value of what you return. So instead of returning true or false, instead of this whole thing, you can just say return, and then here you put the condition itself. And now this condition is either going to be true or it's going to be false. But you see, you will have the exact same return from your method. So this is how it looks like. Instead of having all of this, I'll take this whole thing out and I'm going to put it here. And this method going to do exactly the same thing as our whole else, if else, blah, 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 all of that. And you can do it at any time. But it's important that it only works if you have any type of condition. So if you have any type of condition here that is, let's do it like this. Hey, come on, why is it not writing? Okay. Any type of condition here, like this. Condition. Then you can simplify this whole thing. You can always simplify it to just return condition. Always. And if you don't believe me, then try to find an example where you can't. Okay? If you find this, then write in the comments and I'll show you how you can do that. Obviously, it doesn't work if you have if else, right? If you have here some kind of else if, well, then it's not gonna work. But again, I see in a lot of cases something where it's a simple boolean that you need to evaluate. You don't need to have if else to evaluate this boolean. Okay, so it's a very easy improvement for you when you start with the coding. How you can basically make your code look way better without adding unnecessary if else statements. Okay, let's do another example of a real world thing where people get a little bit confused. And the confusion is usually, do you need to have multiple if statements or do you need to have else if statements? That's the confusion. We're gonna have something like account and create new account, and we're gonna have a bunch of different fields passed in there, right? So for example, string name, then decimal revenue, and for example, ID. What will be the ID? No ID. No need for the IDs. Let's have a look very quick. Let's have a look. What are the other fields we can have? Let's go to the contacts. Or what is it? Account. Something from this one. Details, right? So for example, description. Do we have description? Yeah, we have description. Nice. So description can also go in there. Just making sure that this, okay, so this description, this is the right one, okay. And string description. Again, you see we have the same problem, so I'm gonna align it a little better, like this, like this, like this, and like this. Here we go, right? Now, for this one, obviously the first thing that we need to do is just create account, new account variable, and we're gonna return an account, right? So now here our task for this exercise is to, by the way, feel free to actually solve those tasks first and then write in the comments, and I'm gonna give you actual feedback, right? Because I need people writing comments, so if you like those videos, you want to have more of them, please do engage somehow so I know you like them. Share them, write comments, yeah, okay. Anyway, so our task is to set all fields that are passed, right? All this set 3 fields to their values and return account. But now here's the condition. If the argument, if the provided argument is null, then set to some default value. Okay? Now, let's first do the simplest way. Account.name would be equal to name, right? And here we need to capitalize because name in this case is API name of the field, so we need to capitalize it, right? Account dot, what else do we have? Annual revenue equal to revenue, and account dot description would be equal to description, like this, right? So this would be the basic version of this method. Now we have this condition, and something that a lot of people would do after they learn if else is doing it in this way. Okay, if name is equal to null, then we would say that account.name equal to test account, right? So then we have the default one, and then we have else if name is not equal to null. Then we have this one, like this. Hey, what's going on here? Okay, test account, otherwise it's name. Now, so many people that solve this task, I saw they continue with else ifs. And this is not correct. What you need to do is that you need to have an if statement for each separate field that you're setting. So here and now, we would check for annual revenue. And we say annual revenue, if it's equal to null, then we have some default value, and that's going to be, let's say, 10k, right? 10k is going to be default value. Else, it's going to be revenue like this, right? We can even just else if you can use else if you can use else, right? Okay. So then we're gonna need to have another account and description. If description is equal to null, then description is gonna be a test. This account is just for testing. And else, we're gonna have here a description like this. So how do you know if you need to have multiple if statements or they need to be else if statements, right? Because definitely if we have something like this, if we have here else if, that will be completely wrong. You cannot have those else if. And the reason for that is because they are not connected between each other. We have if statements, and okay, we have else if statements when we are evaluating different conditions. Wait, this is not correct. We have else if statements when we are evaluating the same conditions, the same condition, or the same set of variable. Here in this case, we are evaluating name and then annual revenue, which is, by the way, I made a mistake here, which makes me realize. Okay, so I made the mistake here. It should be revenue and here should be description. Description like this, right? This is what I meant. Okay, so you see, here we are evaluating a name variable, and here we're evaluating the revenue variable. We don't have any connection between them. We make different decisions and we execute different logic because those are completely different variables. If we were keep evaluating different cases for the name variable, for example, right, name is equal to null, then do this else if name contains test new test account, something like this, doesn't really matter. But you see here I'm using else if because I'm keep evaluating on the same variable, just different conditions, and I want to apply different logic on different cases. But if I take something that is completely unrelated, another variable, for example, right, then I need to have another if statement. I cannot keep going with the same else if. I cannot mix them together. If I were to mix them together, it would be very bad. Because then, here for example, right, what happens if name is null and also revenue is null as well? Remember, only one of those else if can be executed. So this will totally ruin the whole case, right? So we cannot have this. So we need to have them separate. And in this case, you see here, this is the way I would basically solve it, right? So you can see then in this case, we are setting, okay, annual revenue is going to be 10k, right? Then it's going to be test description, blah, 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 all of this. Description is equal to null. I don't know why is it still complaining. Descriptions, I have here descriptions, that's why. Okay, so description is equal to null. And is it going to be happy Apex compiler? Yeah, hey, nice. Okay, so you see, it's important. If we go back to the analogy with the flow, right? And I know that some people like analogies with the flow. I used to like them. I don't like them that much anymore. All right, so basically, this is one if statement. One decision element in a flow is equal. I don't know how to spell decision properly. I'm sorry, guys. This is not spelling. I was coding when I was learning English instead of learning English properly. Okay, so decision element. right? So one if statement equal to one decision element. And if you feel like you need to have multiple decision elements throughout your logic, this is totally fine. But then it means you need to have multiple ifs, multiple if statements, right? But if you keep evaluating different paths for the same conditions, then you need to have only one decision element. And that means that you only need to have one if statement and then add a bunch of else if possibilities. Now I want to show you how I would write it even better in real life. Something I would do is that I would take this. Yeah, I would take this thing and I would just use the name variable. And I would just take this one out. Okay, so I would do this like this, like this, like this. Okay, this, and I would say name and revenue and description, right? So I would basically first I would check the variables here, and then I would say, okay, if they're null, then I will do this, and then I would create the account, and then I would return the account. That's the way I would do it in real life. So here, the full one, so you can have a look. Right, this is proper code, this is best practice code, and that's the way you should be writing it. Okay, so the last topic that you need to know about else if statements is actually something that doesn't have anything to do with the else if statements, or if else or whatever, but it is kind of smashed together, usually together, right? So let's have a look at the examples. I have here my notes, and it's ternary operator. Okay, I personally, if you're a complete beginner, you can just write anything with if else statements, and there's nothing bad about it, right? I would almost prefer you writing if else statements over ternary operator or any kind of operators that we have. So it comes in two different variations. The first one, let's have a look. So basically always it follows the same structure like this, question mark, something, and then something. It always follows the same structure. And also here we have variable, right? I'm going to show you in a second, but the structure is the same. So let's say we have integer sum is equal to 10, right? And string, let's do like this, revenue is equal to 100. 100 of something, doesn't matter, 100. So result, now I'm asking revenue greater than 500. Yes, is it? Yes? Yes or no? Right? So now if this thing is true, this condition, whatever I put here, this will be assigned to this variable result. So I'll say we are rich. Yes, like this. We are rich. Okay? And no, find a job. So now if the revenue is over 500, then we are rich. If no, then find a freaking job. Okay, system debug result, and let's execute this and see what is the result. Debug only, find the job. Okay, but if it's 600, then we are rich, right? This is ternary operator. It's very easy. So it always goes in the same format, right? It always goes like this. Let me go back to the paintings. It always goes like this. There's condition, question mark, and then here, what should I do if it's true, and what should I do if it's false? Now it's important that there's always some kind of variable here, and then equal sign. And then if the condition is true, then this value will be assigned to this variable, or if it's false, then this value is going to be assigned to the variable. You cannot have your ternary operator just as a separate thing. It doesn't really work this way. There's no point in it. Right? So you can see it's incredibly easy, but kind of effective way of doing the if statements, right? Because how would you do it with the if statements? And why do we even discuss it, right? Because you would need to do a little bit more of coding, right? You would need to say, okay, string result equal to, now we know how to do it, find the job, right? And then if revenue is over 500, then result is we are rich. Like this, right? That would be with the if else statement. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 lines of code. But with a ternary operator, it's so easy. We have only 1 line of code. And it is kind of true, but to be honest, for real life, in a lot of cases, you will not have that simple of a condition. The conditions are sometimes pretty heavy, and I don't like how it looks because it makes your code is kind of hard to read. And here's an example where we could have used it, right? So let's go back to our previous example. This is where we could have used it, right? So we could have said something like this: annual revenue, okay? Revenue, is it equal to null? If it's yes, if it's equal to null, then put 1,000 in there, or 10,000. And if it's not, then put revenue in there, revenue variable, right? Now the same thing is description. Is it equal to null? If yes, then write this whole thing, and if no, then put the description inside. Put description inside. And then the same goes for the name. Name, is it equal to null? If yes, then write test account. And if no, then write name variable in there. And then we don't need all of these if else statements. Now, when you look at this code, is it more readable? Debatable. It's really debatable if it's more readable, to be honest. I don't know. Yes, we have less lines of code, but now I have to use my brain to think about this whole thing here. Because at the end, in your brain, you're still gonna kind of put it into your if-else logic, right? Because essentially, we are even speaking about this. If revenue is null, then it's 10,000, otherwise it's the revenue variable. Now, even when we speak about this, we're using the if-else logic. So yes, the ternary operator, it exists, it has own usage, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Sometimes I would even go as far as just banning this and saying, hey, just use an if-else statement. Don't be so like quirky trying to use the ternary operators all the time. You don't have to do that, right? You can use them. Just be mindful about this, especially if your conditions are getting really, really complicated and really huge. Then definitely don't keep using those ternary operators. You can also have a ternary operator inside of the ternary operator, right? So you can have here, okay, if it's null, okay, if it's let's do it like this. Here you can have also a ternary operator, right? So you can say then, okay, his revenue is greater than 100k. Is it greater? Yes, then put something, right? But no one can read it, right? So I'm just not even gonna write it. No one can read it, right? So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And that's the main rule of best practices. Now, on top of that, there's also this thing here. Null coalescing operator. So basically, what you can do, for that we would need to flip it a little bit, right? We would need to say, okay, if revenue is not equal to null, then 10k. Okay, so basically, this will be kind of a shortcut for this. And again, like this thing exists, right? So you can have a look at this, right? We can have a look here. I personally, I don't think how much benefit you get from there. Like, this thing is good, but again, I don't know. Like, I'm not a big fan of them. And since you're watching the beginner series for coding, right? You're a beginner. Please try to keep your code as simple as possible. The simpler your code is, the less of a fancy stuff you're using, the better it is. Okay? So please keep your code as simple as possible, and that means using if-else statements instead of those crazy operators. That's gonna keep your code clean, and it's gonna be way, way, way better. So please keep this in mind. That's everything you need to know about if-else statement. Thank you. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe. See you in the next one.